Breaking developments in the Middle East. Israel has accused Iran-backed groups of carrying out a cluster bomb strike, calling it part of a so-called mega revenge operation. Tonight, we unpack the facts, the impact on civilians, and what this means for the region's fragile stability. Reports from Israeli defense officials suggest that multiple rockets armed with cluster submunitions were fired toward southern Israel. Several bomblets exploded across open areas, while others reportedly landed near residential zones. Although Israel's Iron Dome intercepted some of the incoming projectiles, the spread of submunitions meant that damage occurred in multiple scattered locations. Cluster bombs are notorious for covering wide areas, making them especially dangerous in populated regions. Eyewitnesses described loud, successive detonations and smoke columns rising in the distance. No official casualty figures have been confirmed yet, but first responders have warned that unexploded ordnance could endanger civilians long after the initial strikes. The attack is being described by Israeli media as unprecedented in scale compared to previous rocket launches from proxy militias. Government spokespeople have labeled it part of a coordinated revenge campaign by Iran's allies, signaling that this may not be an isolated incident. Israeli officials were quick to frame the attack as evidence of Tehran's direct influence in regional conflicts. According to their statements, Iran has long supplied advanced weaponry and training to allied militias across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. The use of cluster munitions, they argue, suggests a higher degree of coordination and logistical support than standard rocket barrages. Tehran, however, has not issued a direct response. Historically, Iranian leaders have denied operational responsibility for attacks by their allied groups, framing them instead as independent resistance movements. Analysts believe this strike could represent a shift in proxy warfare strategy, as cluster bombs are far deadlier and politically sensitive than conventional rockets. By escalating to such weapons, Iran's allies may be attempting to send a message of deterrence, but at the risk of triggering harsher retaliation from Israel. Diplomatic channels are now buzzing with speculation on whether this attack was ordered from Tehran or executed independently by local commanders. Cluster munitions are banned under international conventions because of their devastating humanitarian consequences. Unlike precision-guided weapons, cluster bombs scatter dozens of smaller bomblets across a wide radius. Many fail to explode immediately, leaving behind a deadly hazard similar to landmines. In Israel's case, emergency services have already cordoned off several areas where unexploded submunitions were discovered. Civilians have been warned not to approach metallic objects or debris. The psychological toll on residents has been immense, with families forced into bomb shelters while fearing hidden dangers in their own neighborhoods. International organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have condemned the use of cluster munitions in populated areas, calling for urgent investigations. Humanitarian experts warn that even if the physical damage appears limited, the long-term risks of unexploded ordnance could endanger children, farmers, and everyday workers for years. In past conflicts, cleanup efforts have stretched over decades, raising fears that this incident could have enduring consequences for affected communities. In the hours following the strike, Israel launched retaliatory air raids on suspected launch sites in southern Lebanon and parts of Syria. Military officials stated that the targets included storage facilities, training camps, and command centers linked to groups loyal to Iran. Fighter jets struck with precision, guided munitions, and footage released by the Israeli Defense Forces showed large explosions lighting up the night sky. Prime ministerial advisors have vowed that any use of cluster munitions against Israeli civilians will be met with decisive force. the Israeli public has responded with mixed emotions. While many support strong retaliation, others fear escalation could spiral into a regional war. Political commentators note that Israel's government is under heavy pressure to demonstrate strength, particularly after being surprised by the scale of the cluster bomb attack. Officials have also hinted at mobilizing additional reserve forces, a step usually reserved for broader operations. The situation suggests that both sides may be preparing for a drawn-out confrontation rather than a short exchange. World leaders and international organizations have reacted with alarm to the reports of cluster bomb usage. The European Union issued a statement condemning any use of banned munitions, urging restraint from all sides. The United States reaffirmed its support for Israel's right to self-defense, but stopped short of directly accusing Iran. Russia and China, meanwhile, called for de-escalation and warned against what they described as provocative responses from Israel. At the United Nations, several members pushed for an emergency Security Council meeting to address the incident. Human rights advocates highlighted that the use of cluster munitions, regardless of political justification, poses a grave threat to civilian populations and violates the principles of proportionality under international humanitarian law. The lack of consensus among major powers, however, underscores the difficulty of addressing such incidents diplomatically. Each global actor views the conflict through the lens of its own strategic interests, leaving civilians caught in the middle. The Middle East is a web of alliances and rivalries, meaning one attack rarely stays isolated. Analysts fear that this cluster bomb strike could embolden other militias aligned with Iran, such as the Houthis in Yemen or Shia militias in Iraq. Already, reports indicate increased military activity along the Lebanese-Israeli border, with Hezbollah forces allegedly moving equipment closer to frontline areas. Jordan and Egypt, both of which have peace agreements with Israel, are closely monitoring their borders for signs of spillover violence. The Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, worry that Iranian proxies might escalate operations across multiple theaters as part of a coordinated strategy. Such a domino effect could transform the conflict from a bilateral crisis into a region-wide confrontation. The possibility of simultaneous proxy attacks across land and sea lanes is a nightmare scenario for global energy markets. Given the Middle East's central role in oil and shipping routes, Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful regional ally, is seen by many as the prime suspect in orchestrating the cluster bomb strike. With a vast arsenal of rockets and advanced weaponry, Hezbollah has long posed the greatest threat to Israel among Tehran's proxies. If confirmed, the use of cluster munitions would mark a significant escalation in Hezbollah's tactics. Israeli intelligence has consistently warned that Hezbollah possesses not just rockets, but also precision-guided systems capable of overwhelming air defenses. The group's leadership, however, has remained vague, issuing statements of solidarity with resistance forces without directly claiming responsibility. Analysts believe Hezbollah may be testing Israel's red lines, gauging how far it can push before triggering a full-scale war. For ordinary Lebanese citizens, the prospect of retaliation is deeply unsettling as their country continues to struggle with economic collapse and political paralysis. The fear is that Hezbollah's actions could drag Lebanon into another devastating conflict it can ill afford. The reported use of cluster munitions raises thorny legal questions. While the Convention on Cluster Munitions bans their use, neither Israel nor Iran is a signatory. This legal gray area allows both sides to argue technicalities, even as civilians bear the brunt of the consequences. International lawyers point out that even without formal treaty obligations, the principles of customary international law prohibit indiscriminate attacks. Diplomats at the United Nations are expected to debate whether the incident constitutes a war crime. For Israel, pushing the legal argument helps justify its retaliatory strikes. For Iran and its allies, denying direct involvement allows them to sidestep accountability. The broader diplomatic challenge is that major powers are divided. Some will push for sanctions and inquiries, while others will shield their allies from scrutiny. This legal stalemate is typical of modern conflicts, where humanitarian law often clashes with geopolitical realities. Beyond the official statements and military maneuvers, the human stories stand out. In southern Israel, families described scrambling into shelters as alarms blared, children crying in fear as explosions echoed overhead. Local farmers fear their fields may be contaminated by unexploded submunitions, threatening livelihoods as well as safety. Humanitarian organizations have already called for international mining assistance, warning that the cost of clearing contaminated land could be enormous. On the Lebanese side of the border, communities are bracing for Israeli retaliation. Many residents, already burdened by poverty and shortages, now fear they could become collateral damage in a conflict they did not choose. These civilian perspectives highlight the human cost of escalation, a reality often overshadowed by political rhetoric and military strategy. If the cycle of revenge continues, it is ordinary people who will pay the highest price. Looking ahead, the cluster bomb strike has created a dangerous precedent. Israel is likely to escalate its military operations, while Iran's allies may feel emboldened to push even further. The risk of miscalculation is enormous. One wrong move, a missile striking a major city, or a retaliatory strike hitting civilians could ignite a broader war involving multiple states. Diplomats are scrambling to open back channels and prevent the crisis from spiraling out of control. The international community faces a dilemma: how to pressure both sides into restraint while addressing the humanitarian fallout of cluster munition use. Analysts warn that without meaningful de-escalation, the Middle East may be entering a new and more volatile chapter of proxy warfare. For now, the world watches anxiously as each side prepares for what could be a prolonged and bloody confrontation.